My name is Megan Mueller, and I'm one of the 4 founding employees of the St. Constantine School. I've had the privilege to be a part of this school from the ground up, but I've had 4 or 5 job titles in that process. It's been fantastic. It's exactly right for me. I love tackling new things, so that's been fine. Right now, my job title is Head of Strategy and Communication for the school, but way back when we started the school in Dr. Reynolds' living room in 2015, one of the things that I got put in charge of was deciding what the outdoor spaces on our campus were going to look like and how we would approach play for our students. I, since then, enrolled in the Outdoor Learning Environment Certification course at North Carolina State and completed that, that course is taught by landscape architects whose specialty is creating healthy, beautiful, natural environments for children of all ages. I've learned a lot both through that program and through the work I'm doing now with the Natural Learning Institute, which is called, otherwise known as NLI. They're our partner in improving our outdoor spaces on campus, and we'll be sneak preview for you guys. We'll be releasing the master plan of the complete and total vision of our campus this spring, and that includes the modeling for what this campus is going to look like as it's fully built out. With a little bit of the gala? Yes, if you're coming to the gala, you'll get like the real down low on all of this. But we're really, really proud of the work that we've done to preserve the freedom and the autonomy and the creativity that children so desperately need through outdoor play through the way that we are going to be landscaping and building out this campus.
Just a quick, walking the sheep.
Oh, yes. If you've met Dr. Reynolds, you may not know this yet, but we're turning into a downright menagerie with Dr. Reynolds at the helm. So the last thing I heard was something, he turned down bees. He was worried about stinging. So the apiary is no, but the aviary right now is yes. I was like, we have enough birds with a chicken thing going on, but apparently not. So so the list keeps rolling. We had a whole fight the whole beginning of the school before we had a single student. It was team goat and team sheep. And the staff, we didn't have a single kid enrolled. We didn't even have a campus yet. We were already fighting over whether we're going to get goats or sheep first. The sheep won. Team sheep, forever. Actually, I have 2 bags of sheep's wool in my office because we're going to card it. The kids are going to process it and card it. And we have one of the parents at the school runs a fiber arts. She knows how to spin, so we're going to spin it into yarn and stuff. That was one of the reasons we were team sheep, not team goat. Though the goats could eat the poison ivy that grows in Bragdon Wood, so there's a point for the goats. That's right. If you want to be a sheep or a goat, obviously, yeah, you want to be a sheep if you have the choice. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of more exciting stuff coming with that that we can talk about more too. But before all of the official stuff, before I get into our research, my research, the things that we've learned running this school, before all of that, about 25 years ago, I was a knee-scraped, callous-palmed, scrappy kid whose mom had to wash her socks twice to get all the dirt out. My sister and I tore around our apartment complex on bikes and rollerblades. We hid in trees from an incredibly grumpy property manager and attempted to dig tunnels to China in the front yard. I ran like the wind. I could leap moderately sized palm trees with a single bound. And I believed I was destined to be the world's greatest gymnast until I outgrew Shannon Miller, my idol, when I was 10 years old. While the professional experience in the area of outdoor play and learning that I have as an adult is valuable, I often find it's the girl with the dirty socks who has the experiences that I need to fall back on. So, without getting too corny and without crying any more than I already am, the child that I was wants to remind you of the child that you were. We have all squished mud through our fist and seen it ooze through the cracks. We have all chased butterflies, and we've all ripped up grass. We have felt the sudden sharpness of an invisible splinter under our fingernails. We have watched the dull purple flush of a bruise spread over our knees. We have sat crowned in the upper leaves of the treetops. We've vaulted off swings at the apex and flown through the air. We've all spun in circles till we collapsed in the grass. Let's try to keep that part of us the part of us that lived for years and years. Right in the front of our minds as we reflect as grown-ups on what children are like, what children want, and what they need. We have answers to all those questions as adults. We have lots of answers. But we certainly had answers to those questions when we were children. All right, that was the tough part. And so we begin. Now I get to be grown up again. All right. It is a truth universally accepted that children ought to play. But where should they play? How often? What sort of equipment should we provide? What games do we allow them to invent? How fast is too fast? How high is too high, and how far is too far? These are contentious questions in our risk-averse age. Before I tackle them, I want to unify us in our mutual resolve to preserve play's vital place in childhood. So let's begin by discussing the critical work that play does in developing children physically, mentally, and spiritually. The benefits children receive from prolonged play, particularly outdoor play, are innumerable. Movements like spinning, jumping, climbing, and running all contribute to the healthy function of organs. These movements also develop crucial muscular and skeletal strength that both prevent injuries in youth and contribute to overall health in old age. Imaginative play helps children develop empathy for others, form the social skills necessary to function well within a group, and provides respite from the pressures and expectations of the adult world. Interacting with the natural world through outdoor play also instills appreciation and love for God's creation. Despite this obvious necessity for outdoor play in childhood, the national trend over the last few decades has been to decrease outdoor play drastically. Our nation's schools, both public and private, continue to shorten and even eliminate recess in favor of more strenuous academic schedules, a direct result, as Mrs. Gilbert mentioned earlier, of school funding and perceived success being dependent on standardized tests and scores. Rather than increasing the quality of the educational experience, this nationwide move toward keeping students inside is actually causing long-term damage to our children. Mrs. Gilbert mentioned that horrible statistic earlier about the national average for children spending time outside right now is hovering around 7 minutes. The epidemic of childhood obesity alone should warn us that as a society, we are not providing for the health of our children, but it gets worse. There's a book that I highly recommend to all of you. It's called Balanced and Barefoot. It was written by an occupational therapist, and the OTs of the United States and the world really are sounding the alarm. Our children are not healthy. Their bodies are not safe for them to safely navigate through the world. There's an alarming growth in pediatric occupational therapy intervention for children of all ages. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of a child who just falls out of a chair. This is actually happening a lot in the classrooms. If you talk to an elementary school teacher, they'll tell you about it. It's not because they're playing around. It's not because they're being silly. That happens plenty. But I taught second and third grade here at the school for a couple of years, and even here we would get students where they'll be sitting in the chair and suddenly they're on the floor and they look at you with shock and surprise. Yeah, and it's because there's their vestibular system, and there are lots of other things going on there, but it's because they're not spending enough time using their bodies outside. Their bodies actually can't stay in the chair, so they lose their balance and fall even though they're holding perfectly still. So it's clear that the opportunity for extended physical exertion through play, so crucial for childhood development, is no longer an assumed part of the average child's experience. Doctors and specialists are seeing increasing numbers of children with underdeveloped motor and sensory skills, poor bone and muscle density, and increased levels of anxiety and frustration inappropriate for their young ages. These factors, combined with increasing screen time and reliance on technology for stimulation, are creating children who are incapable of entertaining themselves, who are physically underdeveloped, and are dangerously predisposed to a wide array of physical and mental disorders that will affect them for the rest of their lives. We can all easily agree in the face of these realities that our children need to play, and they need lots of it. This play must be rigorous and challenging and creative if we expect it to combat the host of ills that I've just described. Unfortunately, many adults agree with these tenets in theory, but are very uncomfortable with them in practice. Adults are uncomfortable with this type of play because when it comes down to it, it involves consistent and ever-increasing risk. Most kids love danger. Anecdotally, many of us here can probably agree that many children seem to seek out dangerous situations with relish. This was actually proven in a 2007 study done in Norway where researchers observed children at play to attempt to identify patterns in behavior and types of play that were sought out, essentially trying to establish the archetypes of play. Groups of many different ages and sized children were observed playing in a number of environments to see if there were any common play behaviors that manifested. Turns out there are, in fact, play behavior archetypes that kids tend to engage in no matter where they're playing, who they're playing with, or how old they are. The study found that children tend to, 1, play with heights, particularly where there's a possibility of falling. 2, play with high speed, particularly uncontrolled speed, and a pace that could lead to collision with a person or object. 3, play with dangerous tools like sticks and rocks. 4, play near dangerous elements like water, boulders, or machinery. 5, engage in rough play with each other like wrestling or play fighting. 6, play where children disappear or get lost and are hiding from a group. Does this sound like the children you know? So we have to ask the question, what is so attractive about all of these play behaviors? It turns out they all have something in common. They all involve risk. We all take risks in our daily lives because we understand that risks can have positive outcomes. Asking your boss for a raise is a risk. So is hitting the snooze one more time in the morning, traveling to a foreign country, running a red light, and proposing marriage to your girlfriend. When adults take these risks, we recognize that a negative outcome is absolutely possible, but we choose to take a chance anyway because the positive outcome is so appealing. When people consider taking a particular action by identifying and weighing particular outcomes, they are practicing risk assessment. We perceive the benefit and are willing to take the risk as a result. This skill is a skill that we use as adults constantly, but it's one we start developing long before we grow up. Well, we develop it before we grow up if we're given the opportunity. Adults are increasingly depriving children of this key part of development by taking the possibility of risk out, where did I go? Possibility of risk out of play. When the stakes are low, taking risks has benefits that far outweigh potential consequences. That's why allowing risk assessment on the playground is such an important opportunity to give students the time and space they need to explore their abilities and limits. I'd rather have a kid learn risk assessment on the playground than when they get behind the wheel of a car. Some kids are fearless and need to take risks in order to learn through failure what they can and can't handle. Some kids are fearful and need to take risks in order to build confidence and discover that they are stronger, faster, or more able than they thought. Practicing risk assessment is the healthy way for both types of children to learn, even though they have opposite attitudes toward life. Developing new skills like balancing on a beam, jumping from tree stump to tree stump, or climbing a rope ladder can take time and sometimes require failure. This might mean scrapes, bruises, cuts, even sprains and broken bones. But kids' bodies are resilient, and this is how they learn what their bodies are capable of and how far they can reasonably push themselves. This skill continues to pay dividends as their bodies mature, and their risk management begins to translate to cognitive, social, and emotional assessments in addition to physical ones. Children need to learn to match their skills with the demands of their environment, which can only be done by allowing them to experience risk in increasingly challenging environments. When we don't allow students to practice assessing, tackling, and overcoming risks, we think that we are protecting them from present harm. In fact, we are opening them up to more serious harm in the future when we cannot control their environment all the time. Falling is how you learn to protect yourself from falling, not your mom yelling, "Be careful," from under the tree. You can't verbally instruct a child how to shift their weight on a bicycle to keep from falling. The sensations themselves are a necessary part of learning to prevent injury. The risks that children choose to take sometimes make little sense to adults, perhaps because we've forgotten what it's like to be a child, or because we haven't played in a long time. We'll watch children struggle to climb up trees and tell them to stop because to us, the risk has no possible positive outcome. What, you're in the top of the tree? Congratulations. I'm way more worried about what might happen to you on your way up. The negative outcome is clear. They could fall and get hurt. What is the benefit of climbing a tree, I ask myself. Surely whatever it is, it can't be worth this risk. But this is the governing principle of play. Humans are motivated to play for the sheer pleasure of it. It is a good unto itself, with no incidental benefits required to make it worthwhile, though as we've discussed, there are many. play must be deeply fun. I can use fancier words than that, like engaging and facilitating social interaction for increased creative imaginative development, but it's still just fun. To a child, a tree should be climbed because of the pleasure of getting into the branches, and that's what makes the risk of falling worth it. And there's nothing wrong with that, even if we don't actually understand, because the motivation to get into the tree is a part of what we're hoping for their development. For all the ways we may disagree with some of the conclusions this particular branch of scientific theory has, even evolutionary biologists agree with me that play for its own sake is a very human enterprise and vital. In his academic report, The Importance of Play, Dr. David Whitbread of Cambridge says, quote, "Play in all its rich variety is one of the highest achievements of the human species, alongside language, culture, and technology." Now, this conclusion is drawn in the report because Dr. Whitbread believes the complex ways in which humans play has contributed to the advancements of mankind beyond the abilities of other species who inhabit the earth. While I disagree with his conclusion, it is compelling that even the most pragmatic of scientific attitudes toward human activity and purpose can firmly hold that the free, wild play of the human child is an indispensable part of the human experience. Before we go on, I want to be very clear about something. A risk is different than a hazard. You may be thinking to yourself, what do they allow these kids to do at the school? Are they like climbing the roof? I rely on the host of play theorists and researchers for my definition of these two distinct terms. A risk is a situation in which there is an unknown outcome that could be either beneficial or harmful. A hazard is a source of harm that cannot be reasonably assessed or accounted for. I could sprain my ankle while playing soccer at school. That is a risk. If I step on broken glass during the game, I am the victim of a hazard. I shouldn't have to be looking for glass while I run around on the school soccer field. Here are some examples of common playground hazards, things that students should not have to worry about when they're playing and that we at the school and adults in general should strive to eliminate from the play environment. Hard surfaces under equipment, inadequate fall zones and playground surfacing, lack of maintenance, broken or faulty equipment, inadequate supervision. This is one of the really important things about our school. We make up for how much risk we allow students to take by really thoroughly supervising them. So if a student's in a tree, there's a grown-up on the ground watching them. They're not necessarily talking to them, but they're there so that if they're needed, they can step in. Pinch points, sharp edges, protrusions, tangling hazards, overcrowded play areas, and contamination with dangerous items, obviously. Through careful planning and implementation and maintenance, it's possible to provide children with a reasonably hazard-free play environment, and it's the responsibility of the adults to do so. So here at St. Constantine, we've worked very hard to eliminate those hazards on our natural playground. Our tree zone has a fall zone made of wood chips. Our slide is built into a hill, which makes falling off of it virtually impossible. Our equipment is regularly checked for structural integrity. By sticking to mostly natural materials, we avoid many of the dangers that largely plastic or metal play environments pose, including sharp edges and pinch points. Supervision is a key factor in our play strategy, so there are always lots of adults watching, and our students have the run of about 3 acres, ensuring that they have plenty of space to play. As far as providing opportunities to practice risk assessment goes, when we were deciding as a school how we intended to approach outdoor play, we tried to keep all of this in mind. We set out to create an environment where students could interact with the natural world, challenge themselves physically, and take risks appropriate for their age and ability. We wanted to create something that was harmonious with nature and that left play open-ended so that students wouldn't get bored easily. And that's how we ended up with our natural playground. We'll be expanding that with the work of NLI into multiple spots around campus, which we're very excited about. The natural playground movement seeks to provide alternatives to the brightly colored plastic playgrounds that have become popular in the last 20 years, in part because children are bored more quickly on equipment that has been designed for safety rather than engagement as the top priority, which playgrounds today certainly are built for safety, not necessarily for fun first. The injury rate on playground equipment designed for safety are also higher, ironically. If the equipment doesn't provide enough opportunities to take risks, children are going to find a way to make it more risky, and that's when the injuries happen. While the appearance of natural playgrounds is on the rise, we are proud to say our school contains the very first natural playground that was built in the city of Houston. Unique elements of a natural, I want to say something else here about this. I can start to get a little nerdy about this part. So playgrounds didn't exist for thousands and thousands of years. If you think about a park, like if you go to Europe and you see a park, what's in a park? Like grass, trees, a garden maybe, some hills. Children were expected to just play wherever it was that they were. There was more of the natural environment was also accessible, but if you looked at a park in a city, it didn't have necessarily playground structures. We started when it was especially the Germans, like the fitness craze, like right around World War I took off, and people started building the like elaborate, like hanging. If you think about Muscle Beach in Venice, it's still that stuff. The old like really tall rings and bars and things like that. The monkey bars, that's essentially a horizontal ladder. Adults started using that for fitness, and then they thought, you know what, kids would probably like that, and so that was the first playgrounds were just essentially like giant for grown-ups fitness equipment of the early 20th century. And then there's a really interesting that happens in play theory after World War II when London was bombed out. Everyone, the city recovered. The children were all brought back into London after they'd been shipped out to the country. And the first thing the adults thought was, the children must be so traumatic for them. We need to immediately do something. We need to create something somewhere for them to play. And so they immediately prioritized putting playgrounds and parks back into the city of London. They put them in. There was never a child in them. Where are the children? The adults thought to themselves. They looked around. They were in the bombed-out buildings. Of course they were. They were clambering over ruins and building forts. So there's actually they're called adventure playgrounds in the States. But they just basically involve loose parks. There's one at the Parish School here in Houston. We've had a really good relation with them, talking about how play works. It's like a kid junkyard wonderland, essentially. That was what they wanted. They didn't want a playground with equipment. They wanted to be able to scavenge and build and collaborate. Anyway. Back to what I'm talking about. Oh, and then in playgrounds. So then the playgrounds of my childhood, this is like the 70s and the 80s. They were like, we joke about them now, they're like death traps. The slides were like straight shots. There were metal rivets on them, but if you were wearing shorts on a hot day with all the skin on the bottom half of you would be peeled off. The swings felt like they were 50 feet tall. But we had fun, didn't we? And then surprisingly, the injury rates on playground equipment now are actually worse than they were. Emergency room visits, all of that has drastically increased as playgrounds have been made for, technically, safety of children, yes, but I would say more really lawsuits, right? So we live in a litigious country. There are less litigious countries out there, so we see here that that's what guides playground design now mostly, is safety from a liability standpoint. All right. Back to our regular scheduled programming. So natural playground includes naturalistic materials, wood, sand, rocks, an emphasis on varied terrain, and open play features that allow children to use their imaginations freely. Our natural playground has grassy hills shaded with trees. Right now the grass is all dead. Winter, gotta love it. A large wooden tree fort with a climbing wall and a rope ladder, a balance beam, a hill slide, climbing boulders, sand play, a large climbing wall, a cave, a gazebo with a stone amphitheater, and several circles of stumps and boulders. And we're really excited. We just did a survey with our current parents over the summer, and we did the master plan, like I said, for the exteriors of our campus, and it's like, zip lines and swings and things that spin and like 10 more things to climb, because climbing is very important. We're really looking forward to continuing to build that out on our campus. It's less expensive to build and maintain than traditional play equipment. It's more beautiful, it's more physically challenging, and most importantly, the students think it's more fun. Finally, the playground also functions as an outdoor learning environment, since it's a habitat for many species of local plants and creatures. And actually, our school is a certified, I think I brought the certificate with me. Our school is a certified national, I don't remember what it's called. Emily, can you pull it out of that green folder? We have all these signs that they sent me in the mail. We have to put them up. It's very fancy. There you go. We're a certified wildlife habitat. So the whole campus is. And that's because we don't spray pesticides on our grass. It's a safe haven for pollinators and birds. So anyway, it's an exciting thing. I don't think there are many schools in Houston that have that status. But we're able to do that because we've just worked hard to maintain the naturalistic elements of our campus. Houston, of course, essentially is a deciduous forest. It's not. We don't think of it that way. I think of it more like a swamp myself. But it would be a forest if we left it to its own devices. So trying to maintain some of that. We're actually working on a plan right now with our gardening teachers to reforest a huge part of our campus. So we've got our own little copse of trees out there that we call Bragdon Wood, and we've got a fruit tree grove that we've planted out by the garden that maybe you've seen. But we're working with a nonprofit here in the city that will actually come and plant hundreds of trees for free because they're. There you go, because they're desperately trying to reforest parts of our city. It's a huge issue. So anyway, it's just another exciting development on this front for us. There are, of course, many other affordances for play outside on our campus. In addition to the engineered playground areas, we've got Bragdon Wood. Rest in peace, the fairy tree. I don't know if any of you guys saw the fairy tree. Yes, we're working on replacing it right now. So we had this, there was a Chinese tallow tree, which if you know anything about trees in Houston, which I don't expect you to, the Chinese tallow tree is a foreign import tree, but its wood is very poor, so it has a shorter lifespan. So they get planted a lot in landscaping because they look nice and they grow fast, but they don't have very much longevity, and they're just not a hardwood tree. And we had a naturally occurring muscadine grapevine that was attacking, essentially, the Chinese tallow tree and had grown all the way over the top of it and created this beautiful, it's a very mature grapevine, so I don't know how long, it must have been there for 15 years, 20 years. It's created a beautiful cave, and the Chinese tallow tree was inside, but of course the tree was beginning to collapse. So this winter, the kids actually had a church service for it, and it was like a funeral / I don't know how to. They wrote poems to the fairy tree, and they put out some. I think the markers are still out there. It's almost like its final resting place. And they had a church service, and it was quite beautiful. And then it got torn down over Christmas. But we're already working on replacing it because we know it was such an important. It was a very important play environment on our campus. We planted a pocket prairie. Which there's another program nationwide where they're trying to encourage people to plant pocket prairies, which is just essentially a small grasslands that would be with all native species to where you're from. So our garden teachers and their students have worked on that, and of course we have a garden. And we have lots of fields, so there's plenty of room for inventive, rigorous play all over our campus. We're now embarking on the second phase of improving our outdoor spaces. Like I said, we're working with Natural Learning Institute out of NC State as the landscape architects. And it's kind of funny when you think about it this way, but we actually hired them first before we hired our architects, because we knew that an architect would say, I have a great idea. Giant buildings, giant building there, giant building there. How many students do you want? Yeah, big buildings everywhere, lots of footprint. And we just knew we needed to do what we needed to do to prioritize keeping our green space. So we started working with the landscape architects first, and then we got our architects and we said, okay, you have to listen to these people. As far as building construction, you can't put a tall building right there because it's going to block the sun onto our garden, things like that. So we're working hard to make sure that maintains a priority as we build out. What time is it? Oh, I'm doing okay. Yes. Okay. We're going to do a few activities before I finish, after I finish my talk. So I want to give you guys some time to ask questions and then also sort of think this through for yourselves. We do this with our staff at in-service every semester. So the final part of what I'm going to just talk at you, I'd like to give you all a glimpse of how we train our staff. As I already mentioned, close supervision is the key to making sure our play methodology actually works. This was me when I was a kid. The grown-ups didn't watch us when we played. They just sent us out. Now, understandably, many parents don't feel as comfortable doing that anymore. Some of our neighborhood HOAs actually would love us to never do that. I don't know if you have an HOA that gets mad if your kids are playing somewhere other than your own front yard, but I do. So we know that obviously free play where children don't feel like they're necessarily being watched, that was a normal part of childhood. It's not maybe as normal anymore. So we want to make sure that students are experiencing that very important thing, which is like the true feeling of freedom and independence where they're not being governed by an adult, but we are maintaining close supervision. So we get them used to it. We're not there to play with them. We're not there to chat with them. There are always those kids who like to hang out with grown-ups a little bit more than their peers, right? And so recess starts and they'll just come stand next to the teacher and start to engage us in conversation. And we actually train our teachers to ignore them. Not to ignore them, like I don't see that kid, but we say, you affirm and then you say, okay, you gotta go play. You can't stand here with me. Because what we want is for them to feel that feeling of, okay, I'm like alone. I have to decide what I'm going to do. Do I take the social risk of trying to go join those kids over there and play? Do I find something that I think would be fun to do by myself? Obviously, interior moments for children are very important, and so not having a, hey, let's do this, you know what would be fun, with an adult constantly. You have to give kids rest and time to sort of expand to be themselves. And that's the interior life of a child, and that really, the only place we allow them to have that really in their lives as children is when they're left to their own devices. So we want to make sure we create an environment where they really do feel like the world is their oyster. As an adult, you look and you go, wow, that's a lot of grass, but I don't know if you ever experienced this. To a kid, it feels enormous here. Have you ever thought about a place that you played as a kid? Like my aunt and uncle, I thought their front yard was 20 miles long. And then I went in as an adult and I said, I thought that was a huge field. How, the scale is completely different. So when kids are, you come here as an adult and you think, wow, a lot of green space. But to a kid, it just feels like they could be 10 feet from an adult and they feel like they're the only one in the world, which is exactly the way we want them to feel. So this is how we train our staff as far as supervision to make sure our play methodology actually works. All the instructions that I'm about to list should clearly line up with what I've said so far about our goal, which is to welcome children to experience gradual risk in every way that they can. So our goal in play supervision is to preserve an environment of truly child-driven free play. So here's the teacher's role. This is the do list that we give them. Do actively walk the grounds. Let kids see you seeing them. Let them get used to the idea that you are there, but that you're not there to control or direct their play. I always think of Trumpet of the Swan. I don't know if you've read that book, Sam Beaver. All the wild animals get used to him so they don't run away when he comes because they just know he's there to watch. We want the children to feel like that. They're the wild animals and we're the adult that's trying to just let them get used to us. We quietly and closely observe kids who are taking risks, and we only intervene or talk to students when necessary. I've mentioned this about tree climbing. So the impulse as an adult, when you see a kid doing something, you may not necessarily want to stop them yet, but you are thinking in your head, I hope they're really thinking this through. And so the words that come out of your mouth are, be careful. This really shifted my perspective when I heard this the first time. When a kid hears be careful, they don't hear what you mean when you say be careful. When you say be careful, what you're saying is, I hope that you're thinking through the things that you need to do while you're doing what you're doing in order to not hurt yourself. But all they hear is, it's not anything prescriptive. You didn't give them any constructive advice. So here's what teachers do here at our school. A kid is climbing a tree. The teacher stands quietly under the tree, watching closely. The child seems to be pausing, and they're maybe unsure what to do next. You let them experience the tension, and then you can say something like, have you thought about whether that branch can hold your weight? Tug on it. How much does it wiggle? Is it wiggling a lot? Okay, and then let them think it through like, oh, I shouldn't go higher in this tree. The branches are getting thinner and thinner, that kind of thing. We have an arborist come every year to make sure none of our tree branches are like dead or something like that. Again, hazard versus risk. So we teach our teachers to ask questions that will help a child think about the thing we hope they're thinking about, because that's what be careful really means, right? It means I hope you're thinking rightly about what you're trying to do. So either they are, and you shouldn't just say be careful to them, because they are. They're already doing what you want them to do, but they just aren't saying it out loud. They're not like, and now, mother, I shall put my foot over here. So they're just doing. They either have thought about it, and so you can just watch, or you'll ask the question, and it'll help them to think about something they hadn't thought about before. And that's actually teaching, right? That's teaching them to do that for themselves the next time they try to do that thing. So be careful is a no-no on our campus. Ask a question to help a child understand what you hope it is that they're thinking of. Make yourself available and approachable. This means, though we do love to stand around in circles and talk to each other about the crazy stuff our students said in class that day, teachers really aren't supposed to be, it's not social hour when we're doing play supervision. So you shouldn't see a group of teachers all with their coffee, standing in a circle chatting. We're supposed to be out watching students carefully. Firmly put a stop to physical violence, inappropriate language, interactions with inappropriate power dynamics. We are a pre-K through college campus, which means we have students of all ages running around playing outside, which is wonderful. We encourage and allow wrestling and rough play. I'll never forget, we had a bishop from the Orthodox Church here visiting one day, and two boys sort of like rolled by like a human tumbleweed, wrestling, and he was just like, exactly right, very good, and kept walking. We, of course, were all like, oh, what's he gonna think? There they come, and then he was just like, oh, good, that's exactly what they should be doing. The thing we teach teachers to say is, are you both having fun? And the other thing you have to say is, are you both still having fun? Because you know what it looks like when one kid realizes it's not fun anymore, and they start to, as an adult, you can see it coming. This is a very important thing for children to experience because it's emotional regulation, right? You can feel the emotional shift, but the other kid doesn't necessarily feel it, right? And so suddenly, we've had, especially when the school year starts and we have new kids come, and dynamics are different and people don't know each other very well. One kid won't know they're fighting, and the other kid thinks they are fighting all of a sudden, and so then you go and break them up, and one of them's crying, and one of them's horribly confused. So we teach kids, we just say it, we'll be watching them, and we'll go, are you both still having fun? And usually it's, yeah, and then they keep going. But if it's not, if one person's starting to, get out of breath, muscles get tense, shoulders start to go up, you can see when it's happening to a child. You help them learn how to say, you know what, I'm not having fun anymore. I need to communicate that to my partner, or else I'm going to start trying to fight. Obviously, these are key development things that you want them to have, so that when they're an adult, they know how to regulate themselves in moments of intensity, right? They're not always going to be in a knockdown, drag-out wrestling match with their peers when you're an adult, unless you go into a very specific line of work. But that emotional regulation is the thing that we really want to help them to teach. But if it's physical violence, we put a very firm stop to that. We wait to praise or compliment a child until after the fact. I tell this story every time. We have a climbing wall over here, and there was a second grader who I knew was intimidated by it. She would get a little ways up, and then she would jump off because she didn't want to go all the way to the top. And one day while I was watching her, she got all the way to the top. No one was around. She didn't know I was watching her. I was watching her very closely, obviously. She got to the top. She looked around. She jumped down and ran away. The moment was all hers. I didn't, yay, you did it! As a parent, I do this all the time. It's what Kate said about needing, trying to remember to be objective with your own kids. That feeling of pride in the self and self-confidence without needing approval from an adult is so important, because otherwise they'll think that they should try things for my approval, right? We get kids who are like this. They'll go do something and report it back to me. They'll come running up to me, Mrs. Mueller, I did blah, blah, blah. And I try very hard not to, yay, good job. I say, wow, was that hard for you before? I'm so glad you kept trying. That's not, you did it, hurrah. It's not a cheerleader. It's celebrating the effort, not the accomplishment. And if you can celebrate effort, not accomplishment, you get kids who are not obsessed with accomplishment, and especially kids who don't feel like they need to have accomplishments in order to interact appropriately with grown-ups, right? We have kids who come like that, where they think in order to get a grown-up to like them or to engage with them, they have to prove all the great stuff that they can do. We don't want kids to feel like that about us. We don't need them to be good at doing cartwheels for us to like them, right? Some of the other kids may feel that way, but we don't. So here's the don't list. The don't list is just as long as the do list. Don't start or moderate games. We have to teach teachers this. We love kids. That's why we do this job. If I had it my way, I'd be out, my parents called me the Pied Piper when I was a kid. I would be out there messing around, playing games with them all day if I didn't know it was wrong of me to do that. It's fun, but the kids need our help orienting their focus away from adults. This is like the one part of their day where they aren't wondering what an adult wishes they were doing, right? I'm going, put on your shoes. No, don't do it that way. Do it this way. It's faster. Get in line. We're going to go wash our hands. Come sit down in your desks. Even at our school, the expectations of adults are the governance of the classroom. That's as it should be. But we need to give them time in their day where they aren't worried about what an adult thinks they should or shouldn't be doing. So we have to make sure that we aren't the source and locus of fun, and that the adults on the playground aren't the source and locus of their attention either. Don't do anything a student can do. This happens sometimes. They consider us to be, of course, impartial. So they'll say, pick who's the next person to be it in tag, or, you be the finish line for this foot race. We say to redirect and find a student who can do that job. This is a good opportunity for teachers to facilitate bringing a child in to a game who maybe wasn't otherwise engaged. But it's just, again, trying to get students to realize that what we're going for is for their internal growth and their relationships with other students. We're not interested in using the playground as an opportunity to cultivate relationships with the students, except for that they know they can trust us, that we're always there for them. Don't suggest activities. If you see a group of students who looks bored, don't go over and go, hey, you know what, guys, have you gone over there and seen that blah, blah, blah? Or you could go feed the sheep. Don't suggest things. Boredom is the breeding ground of creativity. Let them be bored. Don't make up blanket rules. This is hard. There are public schools that won't let the kids play in the grass if it's wet. And as an adult, it's much more convenient to have a classroom full of kids who aren't covered in dirt and sand if you're trying to maintain order, right? So as a teacher and a parent, it's much easier to be like, you know what? I do this to my kids sometimes. The TV is broken today. Whatever it is, blanket rule that makes my life easier. We don't allow our staff to make blanket rules. So we have rules like shoes that are good for climbing, rain boots, not good for climbing. You can't be wearing your rain boots if you want to climb a tree. That's not, that's for their safety, right? You need full foot flexion in order to climb a tree safely. If you're wearing a boot, you're like this. You shouldn't be trying to do something like climb a tree. So we have things like that, but we don't allow our teachers to just say, you know what, kids, no spinning. You're spinning too crazily. You redirect. You can say, you, particular child who's doing this thing that's ruining everything, you have to go somewhere else to play. But you can't, don't make up blanket rules. Don't take away recess as a punishment. This is something that unfortunately is unique about our school. If you're having problems in the classroom, you need more time outside, not less, right? That's the kid who you want, extra recess is the prescription for that problem. So recess is not earned by good behavior, just like math instruction is not earned by good behavior, and we think that math instruction and recess probably are just about the same importance. If you catch me on the wrong day, I might say that recess is the most important. So we don't make them sit out of rewarding classroom activities when they misbehave. There are other ways to deal with redirecting behavior. The exception is children who cannot be trusted to remain safe. And for very small children, this manifests as like running away from your class. So like if the teacher is out there supervising and a 3-year-old runs away, well, can a 3-year-old fit through the bars in our fence? Let's not find out, right? So the only time that we prevent students from going out to recess is if a student's having a particularly hard day with like trying to escape, or like an elementary schooler. We'd never have had someone do this, but we've got crash bars on our gate for fire escape because we're required to by fire code. But if a student were trying to run out of campus, obviously that would be the exception. A few rules that always make people smile. I already said the are you both still having fun. Sticks hit sticks. This is a very important rule at our school. Sticks hit sticks. Stick play. Free loose materials are very important for children. It sort of creates a kind of currency. The most valuable sticks are like carefully hidden when it's time to go in from recess because nobody owns the sticks. The sticks belong to the school. So we started to have kids who were like bringing really good sticks from home, and we were like, okay. So, they'll hide them because they have to go back into class because they don't want other people to find them. It becomes very elaborate. But we had, sticks hit sticks so that we aren't having kids, wailing on each other. Is everyone still having fun? So another one that is a rule here, no props or buddies to help you get into a tree. If you're strong enough to get into the tree, you're probably strong enough to handle yourself once you're up there. But if you got a boost or you climbed a chair or a stack of 10 kids and you climbed on top of them, your muscle development is probably not such that you're safe in a tree that is that challenging. So if you're able to pull yourself up, and it's so fun to watch them work on it. There's this one tree where when you're in about 5th grade, you maybe are the right size to be able to run at it and step off and then grab the branch and then pull up and get onto it. And it's very fun to watch the kids work on becoming able to get up into that tree because they know that no one is allowed to help them. Okay, so what I wanted to do really quick is talk about identifying risk. So this is the whole thing that we want them to be doing. I have 4 categories of risk: physical risk, cognitive risk, social risk, and emotional risk. So let's talk about physical risk. What are some things that you know from your experience that that would count as physical risks that kids do in play? This is the part of class where people have to participate. Sure, climbing a tree, yes, physical risk involved, right? They know that they could fall, they know that they could get hurt. We certainly are very aware of the physical risks of things that our students try. So we want them to be aware of the physical risks when they're climbing a tree. Jumping off of stuff, right. So when we help students assess physical risk when it comes to jumping off of things, we aren't going to be like, well, playgrounds, rules stipulate that there needs to be a fall zone. We're not going to get into that with them. We're going to talk about assessing their environment to see, you know that feeling of jumping off something and landing on a hard surface, that shock wave of pain that goes through your body. It's not as bad when you're a kid, but it's way worse when you're a grown-up. But we can all remember how that feels. Understanding the height at which you jump, changing the impact on your body, all of those things. Those are physical risks that we want them to learn. They would need to experience those feelings so that they can learn how to protect themselves. What else is a physical risk? One that we always get is spinning. Spinning is like drinking water to a kid. Like their body's going to tell them when they need to do it. And sometimes your brain, it really does need to spin. It's going to help them. It helps your inner ear development so that they aren't going to get vertigo when they're old people. It's like a physical need. So if we see a kid spinning somewhere, we just find them the appropriate place to spin, right? Like, so spinning, maybe not in the classroom, Go over there, patch of grass, spin your heart out, you know. Physical risks, anything else that you can think of? Throwing things, yeah, exactly, yeah. There's some social risk involved with throwing too. But yeah, what you throw, how heavy it is, how unwieldy it is, what you're throwing it at. Those are all physical risks. Good. Let's do emotional risks. What are some of the emotional risks that kids experience through play? Rejection, yes, this is a big one. I'm working through this with a parent right now. We have a long-standing, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, but it usually is a kickball game that's going on right now on campus, and it's a lot of older kids who are a little bit bigger and stronger, and there are some younger kids who they're trying not to let play because they don't want to play with them, and that's fine at our school. We aren't going to be like, you have to let that kid play with you. This is the social risk, right? So if a young kid is willing to put themselves out there and say, can I play with you guys? That's not just, that comes at a cost. Some kids don't feel it, and some kids really feel it deeply. Some kids really feel that rejection of an older kid saying like, this game's not for third graders, right? The mom's impulse was, you should make a rule. There's the kickball game for these kids and a kickball game for these kids, because she wanted to protect her daughter from the feeling of not being allowed to play this kickball game. And I was like, you know what? The thing that's going to fix this for your daughter is time. She's going to be the big kid soon enough, right? But in the meantime, that if she's willing to take the social risk and keep trying, there's persistence, and you never know. You might catch one of those big kids on an off day. They might let you in, right? And some kids don't have to be taught that, but some kids do. That's really hard. Social risks, anything else? Yes, absolutely. You can make yourself a pariah, right? If you decide to be the big baddie on the playground, hopefully the other kids are going to help you feel that, right? Oh, my behavior means that no one wants to play with me anymore. As teachers, we are going to keep the kids safe, but we allow a lot of that to take place, that back and forth, where a child decides that they're going to lash out, or a child decides that they're going to try to take control of an environment, and the other kids who are playing respond badly to it. A child is going to learn that being cruel or losing their temper actually is a social risk. So if you want people to want to play with you, you need to think about regulating yourself a little bit better, or you need to, stop being abjectly cruel to the kids that you think you want to be your friends. Any other social risks you can think of?
Risk of bullying.
Yeah, absolutely. So bullying is a really interesting, I actually have a whole other talk that I don't think I've ever had to give, but I have it ready and it's all printed out about bullying. We work really hard on helping, especially when we communicate with parents, understand the differences between rudeness and meanness and bullying. Rudeness is accidentally, constantly offending people. Sometimes that's a social risk that's taking place, and sometimes, obviously, we have students at our school and every school where they just aren't aware that that's the vibe they're giving off until you teach them to see the consequences of their behavior. But persistent bullying, that falls into a category. That's where it's intentionally aggressive behavior. I haven't written it all out here. Repeated over time that involves an imbalance of power, and that's something that as staff we watch for and control very carefully, because we want kids to experience being rude themselves and the fallout. We want kids to experience being the recipient of someone's rude behavior and how they respond. It's the same thing with being mean, right? We want kids to know what it's like to be mean and then get sort of hopefully the clap back from your peers. We want kids to experience how to handle someone being mean to them. But bullying falls into another complete category. That's where children need our support. They tell us what's going on in their lives, and we don't expect them to categorize it. We don't expect the child to be like, you know what, I think I'm being bullied, now that I think about it. According to the definition of bullying, that's what the adults in their life are for. So it's very important for us as grown-ups to be able to assess and say, you know what, that's not just rudeness, or you know what, that's not just meanness. This sounds like it is what would be considered bullying, because we know that's a life or death situation in many cases, right? The epidemic of suicide in our country specifically is pushing down younger and younger, right? We know that. Okay, any other emotional risks that people take? Yes, the competitiveness. Whoo, this is so hard. I have my son is 3, and this is his big, where if there's a line, he better be first in line. If we're going to the car, his door has to open first. So it's very interesting for me as a parent because I'm like having parent responses to it, and then I'm like, you know what, I should put on my like play hat and like think about this from a more objective perspective. But yeah, we want students to understand that pressuring for a certain role in a group, constantly saying you need to be this specific kind of person in a group, that's not going to go well for them. And we as adults can constantly be like, no, you have to let someone else have a turn, you have to let someone else have a turn, but that's treating a symptom, right, and not treating the actual cause of what's going on. So repeated social risks of demanding certain things from your peers will eventually have an effect. We want to protect our young students, so if it's going on to a point where there's a power dynamic issue, the adults will step in and intervene. Many of our classes, hilariously, Kate pointed this out to me, our 8th graders had to be given jobs, probably because they needed help keeping their room clean, but our teachers assign jobs because of this, so that every week there's a different line leader. And if you know it's not your week to be line leader, you can learn to be okay with your role in the group changing, so that you don't feel like you have to dominate every group that you're a part of. Because who wants to work with or live with a grown-up who thinks they have to dominate every group they're a part of, right? Let's Mr. Yee. So let's work on that when they're kids, so that the behavior is a little bit improved when they're adults. Were we talking about social risks or emotional risks? We were talking about emotional. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about social risks. Social risks. Yeah.
She'll correct me.
Mm-hmm. Does she do it to other, like kids her own age too, or just adults?
I don't know. I haven't.
Okay, that's an interesting question, because sometimes it has to do with like if a young, if a young child feels like they need to level the playing field with a grown-up, that's a little. So some students will do it with an adult and not with their peers, and some are like equal opportunity, authority. So there's definitely a social risk there if you try to set yourself up as an authority figure to your peers. Yeah, absolutely. Making friends is a social risk, right? There are positive social risks, right? If you are new to a school, you have this risk. If there's a new student who comes to the school, you can be a part of taking a social risk to reach out to someone. Not every kid who transfers into a school is nice, and that's a funny thing that kids have to learn. So you can extend the hand of friendship and then be like, oh wait, you're just new. I just don't know you yet. It doesn't mean my preconceived notions of what kind of person you are have nothing to do with who you really are as a person. So there's social risks no matter what when it comes to making new friends. Anything else? Yeah. We see this with male and female students of all ages. My daughter was 3 when she first started to manifest some of the control dynamics that students use as social currency, which was shocking for me because I wasn't that way as a kid at all. I was kind of like, ooh, okay, let's play kickball. My daughter is a little bit more like, she wants to know where she stands with people, and I think that's where the popularity drive comes from. And we see it a lot. We have kids of all ages, and we see it a lot, especially as social dynamics are starting to develop when students play less and less physically outside. Their social play becomes their rest. So if for children, playing is rest from the strain of life, our middle school and high school students are getting that rest from just sitting around together talking. And that's where we especially see when they start to make that transition to less physical. They're not going to work it out playing tag with their friends anymore. They're going to sit and talk to each other about each other, and we start to see those social dynamics begin to really sort of take the lead. So yeah, the social risks of wanting to feel esteemed by your peers, and so you think you have to put down other people to lift yourself up. There's lots of things that go on there, and we deal with that a lot. I used to be a house head. I don't know if you know about our house system here at the school, but we see a lot more and more students with those issues as they stop playing physically, which is interesting. They're working it out physically is when we'd rather have them do it, because then it'll be easier for them to work it out when they're a little bit older.